What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. And before we jump into today's conversation with Kevin Deshazo, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews you get, the more it helps people find the show, and it really helps to grow the community that we're developing here. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. I put up brand new interviews every single Monday and a brand new takeaways episode every single Thursday. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider sharing it to your Instagram story. Tag myself at the Jacob Kelly, and I'll feature you on my account and send you a message as well. Make sure to tag Kevin at Kevin Deshazo on Instagram when you share it to your story. And now, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Kevin Deshazo. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly, and today we're joined by Kevin Deshazo. And Kevin is the founder of Fieldhouse Media, a company whose goal is to train athletes how to use social media the right way. He is also a partner in Culture Wins, the sports arm of Giant Worldwide, where he works with leaders, teams, and organizations in the sports world to help them build high-performing teams with the championship culture. On top of that, he's a best-selling author, and his brand new book, Keep Chopping Wood, is available now. He's worked with schools like Oklahoma, Clemson, Temple, also worked with Nike, OKC Thunder. He's been quoted by Bleacher Report, ESPN, the New York Times. He's presented at over 250 college campuses. I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Excited to be with you. That was quite an intro. That makes me sound really impressive.
Thank you. Where I want to start, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. I want to talk about high school. What kid were you like in high school? I know some of your goals at that time were to be an FBI agent or a teacher, but what kind of kid were you like back then?
Oh man, you did your homework. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was good. I was always an energy guy, always pretty positive, always had a lot of friends, but was always interested in new things. So the FBI agent, teacher, it was always something new. But I was always out and about, always surrounded by people. I'm a massive extrovert. As I've learned about more about personality and self-awareness and those things, it makes sense kind of who I was in high school. But I was just a guy who just loved to have fun and wanted more than anything else just to be surrounded with friends.
That's awesome. And so ultimately you ended up going to Oklahoma State, right?
That's right. Yep. Go Pokes.
Yeah. And so at that time, then what did you go to school for? And what was hopefully your end goal when you graduated at that time?
Yeah. So I got to college and was just really confused. So I went to OSU, and from the day that I decided to go to OSU, my major was going to be management information systems. So computer-y stuff. And this was 2000, and got in, and the way OSU, the business school, they said, if you want to do computer programming, do computer science. Didn't want to do that. They said, if you want to do the business side of computers, do management information systems. So I love that. So great, let's go. But the business school, you couldn't declare until your junior year. So the first couple of years, just all kind of your basic courses. Then I actually start to get into MIS. And, at this point, you're 3 years into school. And I'm like, this is miserable. I don't want to do this with my life. I don't want to just sit behind a computer, like be an IT guy, which is a very narrow view of what MIS would get you to, but that's what I thought. But at that point I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to finish, get the degree, and then figure out life. And got the degree, and honestly didn't have any plans. It was a weird time, and I'm not much of a planner anyway. Like, I'm not one of those people who had these stages in my life planned out. But most people, I feel like, leave college with some plan, and that plan may get blown up, but they at least have a plan of kind of what they want to do. And I had no idea. So I actually stayed in Stillwater for a few months with a college degree, and I was an embalmer's assistant at a funeral home, making $7.50 an hour, on call every other night, every other weekend as a college graduate. So not exactly what I had in mind, and certainly not what my parents had in mind.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about your time at Foundation Medical Staff, but before I do that, I want to ask if my math is correct, my timelines are correct. Were you at Oklahoma State when they made that run in 2004 in March Madness?
I was one of my greatest. So basketball is I love college football. I grew up playing basketball. And so that was when I mean, OSU was great. Like almost the whole time I was there, they were competing Final Four. So like, yeah, that run with John Lucas and that crew was just incredible.
That's awesome. I've always wondered what the atmosphere like is at a school during that time. Cause like I'm from Canada, so I don't really have anything that parallels that. It's like, how would you describe the environment or the atmosphere at the school during those few weeks?
Oh, it's nuts. Like, and again, so this was OSU is very different today than it was then. And as are many universities. So our football team was not good when I was in college. Les Miles came in, we got to a bowl game, and we thought we had just won the Super Bowl. I mean, it was not, we were a full basketball school. And now over the years, like football has gone on just a totally different trajectory. And so now it's a little more balanced. But back then we were a full on basketball school. And so for our little town, Stillwater probably has 50,000 people, but 20,000 of those being college students. So for our little college town to be having that kind of success and those kind of players getting recognized on a national level, I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, it's hard to describe, but I remember going to games. Uh, there's a game we went to. We beat OU one year, and it was kind of a last second shot. It was so loud, like I was physically in pain. It was beautiful. Like it was just awesome.
And was there any point during that time when you were watching sports, especially at school, where you were like, you wanted to somehow make that a part of your career? Was that something in the back of your mind even at that time, or still not yet?
No, I think, to be honest, sports was always in the back of my mind, which is probably true for most sports fans. But, for a long time, you think you're going to be a pro athlete. Thankfully, I had enough self awareness to realize like that's not going to happen. But then in the college years, I remember, I don't know what year it was, but Mark Cuban bought the Mavericks, and it was such a big deal because the players had like PlayStations in their lockers and stereo systems. Like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. I was like, this guy would be incredible to work for. And so in the back of my mind was like, it'd be awesome to work for a sports organization. So that kind of seed was there, but I really had, a lot of people in college, if they are pursuing that path, they'll go work for the athletic department, right? They'll be a GA, they'll be working in the SID office, marketing, whatever it takes. I didn't even know those things existed. Didn't have any clue those were options. Again, was not much of a planner or a detailed person. I was just kind of accidentally going through life. But that sports thing was kind of always there in the back of my mind.
I mean, and I want to talk about the journey that you then took to get into a career working in sports. So I want to start at the beginning with your I want to say major job out after school was at Foundation Medical Staff. You're there for 5 years. What kind of work were you doing during that period?
Yeah, so my wife today, who was my girlfriend at the time, she had graduated and moved to Oklahoma City. We were both from Tulsa. I was still working with dead people as an embalmer's assistant when we started dating, and she got a job. She graduated right after I did. She graduated spring semester. I graduated winter, and so she got a job in Oklahoma City. And so I followed her, and her boss at the time, who's now my business partner, he just set me up with a bunch of interviews. And one was with a company called Foundation Medical Staffing. He said, "Do you want to be a recruiter?" I was like, "Sure." I honestly had no clue what I was interviewing for. In my mind, coming fresh off college, I think of recruiter as like someone going to college campuses to hire new grads. I was like, I love travel and I love college, so yes. And that's not at all what it was. And I went to the website. The company website had zero information. So again, this was like 2004, 2005. Um, Websites weren't great at the time, and so I had, I mean, it was a 13-person company. I was employee number 13 or 14, but I had no idea what I was interviewing for. And it was essentially to do medical staff recruiting. And so our specialty, our niche was dialysis nurses. And so we would place them on 3-month travel assignments at clinics around the country who were short staffed. So maybe someone's out on maternity leave, or you're just in a remote part of the country where you don't have access to a lot of staff, or just a tough clinic to staff. So we would send them nurses for 3-month assignments around the country. So had no clue what I was doing, had no clue what dialysis was pretty clueless when it came to the medical field. But the CEO, and I didn't need to be, really informed about a lot of that stuff. But the CEO of that company trusted my wife's boss. They were good friends, and so essentially, just based on his recommendation, I got the job and ended up being an amazing job. Loved the people. Loved the job itself wasn't that exciting, but we had great people, and so it was a lot of fun. Kind of lived the American dream, moving up the corporate ladder, getting my MBA. So it was a lot of good years there, kind of until the recession hit.
And so I want to ask something about that. I have a quote written down here from your time there. You said about 13, 14 people And you said you were put into leadership positions, whether you were qualified or not. What do you think it was about you that was getting you put in these leadership positions so early into your career?
I think, and this is going to sound really prideful, and I 1000% don't mean it this way, but I think that people, kind of my personality, my nature, how I'm wired, people are drawn to me. I've always had just tons of friends and able to relate to people, able to relate to people from all walks of life. And so for me, like I was just as cool talking to the secretary as I was the CEO. I was just as cool talking to the person in the business office as I was like the VP of sales. Like to me, people were people. So I didn't really care about the political game. So I had good relationships with everyone, which I think just gave me a lot of influence with people. Now, that didn't mean I was a good leader, right? I was just good at connecting with people and building relationships. And so that was, I think that was the dynamic that was at play. Is I was someone who brings, um, when things are going well, I bring a lot of positive energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of fun, but also want to work hard and get results and make sure everyone feels included in that.
And when you were in there, I believe it was around 2007, you guys started using Facebook to recruit people, right? That must have been like a pretty innovative technique to recruit staff during that time, no?
Yeah, so you got to think. I don't know when this was, but Twitter didn't exist, right? So pre 2009, so it's probably 2007 ish, right before kind of the recession started to go down in 2008. Um, so the economy was kind of tanking, and they kept taking away our resources. So we would get candidates from job boards, from a variety of different websites, and our corporate office started taking away, trying to save money. They started taking away those resources. And I was like, well, we can't really fill job orders if we can't go find medical professionals to fill them. Like we have to have access to these people. And I remember walking out one day, and I was super young. Again, probably shouldn't have been in a leadership position, um, but I noticed my whole team. So I had an 8-person team, um, about $30 million division, and I noticed most of our team was on Facebook. I was like, all right, well, that's cool. I didn't see that as a negative, um, but it kind of clicked to me like, well, if they're on Facebook, all these nurses, like all these healthcare professionals have to be on there. So maybe we can use that to recruit. And so we started trying to find these, we still have databases full of information from candidates. So we just started searching, trying to find these candidates on Facebook, connecting with them, posting jobs. And this is again, like this is, people didn't really have Facebook pages yet, like as organizations. So we're making company Facebook accounts, like a regular profile page. And it started to work because nobody was really thinking of it, but it was an easy way to build relationships, stay connected, and get information and job offers to these nurses, or job opportunities. And our team actually, while everyone else was kind of shrinking and struggling, our team kind of maintained. And I don't know if it was just because of Facebook, but it was kind of at that moment that I realized, like, okay, this may be a serious thing. Like social media at that point, it was very, very new, but it was just a lot of games, jokes. It wasn't serious, right? It was just where you put goofy stuff. And I'm like, wait, no, this is actually making us money. This is keeping us afloat. So that was kind of the first time in my mind that social media became, kind of more of a player in life.
That's super interesting. I was curious as to how you were reaching out to people, and it's cool to hear that you made the company account that looked like a personal profile to reach out to people. That was one of the questions I was going to ask. That's interesting to hear that. And then was it based off of the success that you had doing the Facebook outreach and just your job as a whole that led to you starting your own company in a similar field, Element Healthcare Staffing? That was your first business that you started, right?
Yeah. So as things got worse at Foundation, I was just super unhappy, and I was way immature, insecure, unhealthy. Like, I was contributing to a lot of the negativity, and I wanted out. And but we'd seen so much success with social media, and then Twitter came out, and I was immediately addicted to that, mostly as a sports fan. And so people kind of knew, like, I was looking for a way out, and they kept saying, "Hey, you should go start your own social media agency." Because at this point, right, anyone with a Twitter account was a quote unquote social media expert. I mean, business owners were like, "Well, I'll just have my daughter run Twitter. Like she's on it a lot," not realizing, this is actual marketing and actual sales and like intentional messaging. Um, and so just ethically, I didn't feel okay going to do that. Just because I use social media a lot didn't mean I fully understood it from a business perspective. So I could have gone and started my own social media agency, but ethically, I wasn't okay with it. But I left. A friend of mine who I'd been working with, he had left and started his own healthcare recruiting company. Was struggling a little bit, and I said, "Man, I'll come help you." So we launched Element Healthcare Staffing, just the two of us, and it was a colossal failure. you know, you think that you're really good at your job, and we were like we were two of the best at our organization, and our organization was the best in the industry. And so in our mind, we're like we're two of the best in the country at what we do. We can nail this, not realizing how easy things are. Now, yes, we worked hard and we were pretty good at our jobs, but it's a lot easier when you have the backing of a $500 million organization putting their resources behind you versus just two guys sitting in an office trying to figure out. So launched that on my own and failed miserably.
I always look at failures as not failures, but like experiences that will let you learn. And so I'm curious as to what are some things you learned during that failure, that year period, I believe it was, where you were running Element Healthcare.
Yeah, a couple things. One is the obvious thing that everyone says of don't go into business with your friends because you'll end up not being friends, which was true. And you're like, oh, we'll be fine. It's good. Yeah, we don't need legal paperwork and documents and contracts. Like we're good. Like we're friends. It doesn't work out that way. And so that's just good advice. People should actually listen to. People say it for a reason. Are there outliers? Of course, there are friends who are in business, but I just think it's really tough. I think another thing that I really realized is number one, I need people. It was just the two of us, and I love being around people. I get energy from being around people. I don't know that the idea itself was a failure. I think we didn't have the resources. We weren't really competing with our former organization. Like we didn't need to do the level of business they did. We closed a couple of deals. Like we're good for a few months. Um, but it was I get energy from being around people. Um, I have to really believe, and this is just a me thing, so I don't want to put this on other people, but for me, I really have to believe in the vision of the work. And so I kind of got to a point where I realized, like, even if that was successful, I didn't care about it. That was not work that I actually wanted to be doing. That's not where I wanted to be spending my effort, and just so chose to back out of that. And the same thing was true at Foundation. Like, was really successful for a number of years and had a lot of fun, but at my core, and some people like that were there when I was there are still there, and they love it. And they're doing great, successful, and it's awesome. So that's why like everyone needs to find their own path and kind of what drives them. But for me, it's like I didn't care about the why of the work, and so that greatly impacts my level of commitment. And so I needed to find something that I actually cared about.
Does not caring about the why make it easy to make the decision to stop running your own company at that point in time? Or is it still a difficult decision? As this being your first company, probably can't be easy to shut down, but does not having that why behind what you're doing make it easier?
Probably yes and no. Yeah, I think not believing in the why, especially again from my personality, it's easy for me to bail if I lose interest on things. Like I can kind of move from thing to thing pretty easily. I don't mind change. The difficulty really was, you wrap your identity up in it. It's like you put in hours and months and a year into this, and you think your identity is in that work, which is an unhealthy way to live. It's like, well, if I shut this down, that means I'm a failure. Not this idea failed, not this business failed, not this project, whatever, but that I'm a failure. And so that's where people like you don't want to admit that, which you're not admitting that. It doesn't mean you're a failure, but you believe that lie in your head. It's like, well, I can't admit that, so I'll just a lot of people just keep going in things that they're miserable at or they hate doing, just because they don't want to be labeled. They're so afraid of everyone else thinking that they're a failure. And so I had to get past that as well.
Okay. And so what do you do then once you decide to stop the company? What is your first move? I know you ended up at Smirk New Media, but was that your next move after that, or was there a step in between?
So kind of in the middle of all that, um, it was a weird season. So while I was doing the Element stuff, I'd started doing some work with Smirk, and Smirk was a social media agency here in Oklahoma City. The guy who ran it had helped transition the state's largest newspaper from print to digital, got all their reporters blogging and using Facebook and Twitter at that time. And then he had done some launches for some large He'd left the newspaper, gone to a PR firm, done some launches for some pro sports teams. Not the Thunder in town; they weren't here yet, but well, I guess they were. He'd done some launches for pro sports teams and some large organizations, and then left on his own. And so I went to learn the business side of social media under him. Um, and so was doing that kind of on the side just to make some money because Element wasn't making any money. And then at the same time, I was sitting in an office kind of by myself because at this point, my business partner and I had already broken off. So I'm sitting in an office alone every day for the last 6 months of running Element. Um, and was spending a lot of time on social media as a distraction. And I just kept seeing student athletes getting in trouble on social media. And I was mostly on Twitter as a sports fan. And so while I was kind of doing the stuff with Smirk and while Element was failing, I had this idea of social media education for student athletes. And so I went to my wife and said, "Hey, I'm clearly great at business. I made $0 in this. I think I should start another one." So launched Fieldhouse Media.
That's awesome. And so before we dive into Fieldhouse Media, one of the pivotal moments in terms of you realize the power of social media was an interaction you had with James Harden. Can you kind of share that story that you had with him on Twitter?
Man, well done. This is
Thank you.
incredible. Yeah. So was still working at Foundation, and this was the moment that like I was all in, especially on Twitter. So like as a sports fan, I grew up. You love Jordan. I love Nolan Ryan as baseball player for the Texas Rangers, and you don't get access to these people, right? Like you get to see them on TV, or I used to go to games. My aunt lived in Dallas for a long time. We go to Rangers games, sit on the front row by the dugout, and I'm like throwing my arm out, just like waving at Nolan Ryan the entire game, trying to get him to notice me. And at one point, he's like, "All right, kid, hey," he waves. I'm like, "Yes," freaking out, and like that's the access that you get. And then Twitter comes along, and so I had just been to Houston for a conference with work, and the Thunder were getting ready to go play the Rockets. And so James Harden tweets out, this is when he was with the Thunder. He tweets out something about going to Houston, what's good to eat, or what should I do, something. And we had been to this incredible Mexican restaurant in Houston. Like went 2 out of 4 days that we were there. It was that good. And so I responded, said, "Hey man, check out this restaurant. It's probably the best Mexican food I've ever had." And he responded, he was like, "Really, the best you ever had?" And I'm like, "Oh my goodness!" And I was like, "Yes." We went there like 2 out of 4 days. But I'm like, I'm having a conversation on Twitter with James Harden, which just blew my mind. Like the level of, and again, this is celebrities and athletes were a lot more open to engaging in that way, 10 years ago. And some still are certainly, but at that point I was like, it blew my mind that I'm sitting here having a conversation with an NBA player. So that was just a pivotal moment of realizing like this is an unbelievable level of access that just levels the playing field.
And so it was with the knowledge of the impact athletes can have on social media, coupled with the fact that you've seen these college athletes use social media poorly, we decided to launch Fieldhouse Media. And as you said, your first business made $0. So you already seemed like a bit of an interesting decision to make. But on top of that, you also had no contacts in sports at that time. So how do you go about fostering those connections and making contacts with people in sports as someone with none starting out?
Honestly, Twitter. And that was the thing, is like I was a sports fan on Twitter. And that was really the only reason that I used Twitter. Like I was, it was just there to talk about sports, usually OSU football or Thunder basketball, but whatever. And but when I saw this need, and I saw, on the left, there's these student athletes always getting in trouble, being told they can't use Twitter, they're irresponsible, immature, it's dangerous, it's a distraction. And then over here, you see like business owners, authors, musicians, all these people using social media for good, right? Raising awareness about their platform, their idea, their book, whatever it may be. And so there was just this moment of like, why does it have to be so negative for these student athletes and good for everyone else? Okay, well, there's a need to have a conversation with them. Well, how do I do that? I don't know anybody, uh, and so I just started using Twitter to connect with people. I started using blogging a lot on the Fieldhouse website and tweeting out from the Fieldhouse Twitter account just the general message about social media education and that social media could be good, and started tweeting about that a lot more from my own account, um, trying to get people to affiliate or associate my name with kind of that topic. But I started trying to find anybody I could find in the college sports world to follow, to interact with, whether that was a sports information director, whether that was marketing AD, whether it was an actual athletics director, someone in compliance. Um, just started using Twitter to comment and kind of put myself in the middle of that conversation, to build that brand, so to speak.
And so did you, when you were building that brand through the content, did you start doing that kind of before launching Fieldhouse Media to see if there was interest there for what you wanted to do? Or did you make the jump and then start creating the content?
Um, Created the content a little, and content mostly just being my conversation, right? Just interacting with people. But I don't put a whole lot of thought and planning into things. So it was probably a few weeks of that, being like, nope, this is a good idea, let's go. And then launched the account and said that it's official. This is the company, and it was really interesting because like I didn't have a company website yet, and had a guy building it, and this was probably 2010 ish, 11 ish, and Oklahoma State was getting ready to play. I think they were getting ready to play OU, and someone tweeted out to OSU's quarterback and wide receiver Brandon Whedon and Justin Blackman something about like, "I hope you die in a plane crash," and like OSU, a basketball team when I was there, There's a plane crash that killed several members of the community, and then like a few weeks before, I think it was a few weeks before, there was a plane crash involving the women's basketball team at Oklahoma State, and then some guy gets on and tweets that to them, and it blows up. Um, and I saw a local sports reporter, tweet about it, and I responded, said, "Hey, I've got a company that educates, student athletes in social media." He's like, "Oh, this is perfect," and I didn't have a company, right? Didn't have a Twitter account, didn't have anything, but I was like, "Yeah, I've got a company that does that," and so he's interviewing me for like the local 10 o'clock news, and I'm just texting my web guy like, "Can we just get a logo up? Can we get something?" And me trying to be excited, thinking that people are going to be watching that sportscast. Well, it was like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, like people weren't home for Friday night football yet. So nobody was even going to see it, but it was, yeah, it was just, I just kind of went with it.
So then was that 10 o'clock news being featured there? Was that really the catalyst that, okay, now it's out there. Now I really have to start putting in the work. And then from that point, how long did it take you to get your first client with Fieldhouse?
1 year. Um, so it was really interesting. Now I did a few things for free just because I'd never done any public speaking. And so understanding social media is very different than understanding social media and being able to explain that to people and keep people engaged for an hour and communicate in a thoughtful, logical, somewhat entertaining way. And so I did a few free things around the area. And then, so that would have been in like June ish, when I launched Fieldhouse, probably June 2011, maybe July. Um, and things are not going well for 6 months. Now, it was really interesting because people thought Fieldhouse was this massive organization, and it was just me tweeting a whole lot. Uh, they thought we had a bunch of clients, and I wasn't trying to like portray that, like I wasn't telling them we had clients. They just thought we had clients. And then in December or January, so like 6 months into this, I get an email from an organization called COSIDA, which is the Sports Information Directors Association. So basically, college SIDs, saying, "Hey, we'd love to have you present at our annual convention in June." So another 6 months out, and I have no clue what COSIDA is. Um, and so I'd become friends with a few SIDs, and so I texted a couple of them like, "Hey, like, have you heard of this thing called COSIDA?" They're like, "Yes." Like, well, they're like, "Why?" I was like, "They asked me to speak. Like, should I do that?" They're like, "800 people." Yeah, I'd go ahead and say yes to that. I'm like, "Oh, okay, so that's a big deal. Like, all right, I should do that." And so my first kind of full big on speaking thing was to 800 people, 800 college sports professionals, in St. Louis. I think it was COSIDA, probably 2012. And but once my name was on the agenda for that, uh, like requests just started coming in. "Hey, will you come to our school? Hey, will you come to our school? Hey, will you come to our school?" But it took a year to get a first actual client.
And so how do you then fund the business if you're not bringing in any money for the first year? Are you working still with Smirk Media at the same time as Fieldhouse Media? Is that how you're able to fund that business, or what was the structure looking like at that point?
Yeah, I was doing some work with Smirk, and that was getting us by. My wife, bless her soul, she was working two jobs. I was just dumb. I should have been working at like Starbucks or something, or something part time. But she was working in marketing in the healthcare field, and then she was also running and building her own photography business on the side. So she was working two jobs to kind of help us out because it was a weird time where like I'm not making any money for almost two full years, um, and but we fully believed like this was the right thing to be doing. Like it was difficult. There's anxiety and depression and fear, all these things, because especially as a man, right? You're supposed to be the provider and doing all these things, and none of it's working. But we both, like, conversation after conversation, was like, no, this will work. Like this is where we're supposed to be. So there was that's the fascinating thing about both situations looked the same, right? In terms of Element Healthcare Staffing and Fieldhouse Media, if you're tracking both for 8, 9, 10 months, they essentially look the same. But I believed in one and I didn't believe in the other in terms of like the actual vision of it. And so one I was willing to put in the work, and one I was like, "No, it's okay." So it took a while.
And so when you go, so after you have that conference, you speak to 800 people. Now you're going to all these schools because you're having people reach out to you. What does it look like when you go to schools? And like, how do you educate these students? Is it through presentations? Do you do any hands-on learning? Like, what does it look like when you get to the schools?
Yeah, it kind of varies per school. And so, it was interesting. So starting out, again, this was 2011, 2012 ish, and people were so still afraid of social media. And so everything I'm getting is, "Hey, will you come scare our student athletes off of Twitter?" And I'm like, "Sure," which is not my plan, because my plan is like, no, social media is great. it's really useful for them and for the university if we can help them use it well. But if you think I'm going to come scare them and that's what gets me on campus, then sure, I'll tell you that's what I'm going to do. But then when I would get there, it was a very different message, and so it's a lot of helping student athletes understand the basics of social media, which may seem weird just because they've been on it for so long. But so many of them still just don't get how big social media is, right? They're there mostly to hang out with their friends and get some news. They don't really think about, regardless of how many followers they have, they don't really think about the fact that when they hit send, the world can see that. And they shouldn't think about that, right? They're 17, 18, 19 years old. And so having kind of a conversation about the basics of social media and then trying to help them realize that it's not just a toy, it's not a game, it's not just Twitter, it's not just Instagram, it's not just Snapchat. Like, these are powerful communication tools um, that can impact them for life if they use them the right way, or impact them for life if they use them the wrong way. And so it's a lot of, I'm not coming in saying, hey, don't tweet this, don't post that, don't be an idiot, don't screw up, because that's not really helpful, right? To tell them what not to do doesn't help them understand how to use it better. It doesn't help them understand how to actually build a brand and use it on purpose. And so it's a lot of coming in and just having conversations of what does it look like to tell your story on purpose. And so sometimes that's with every student athlete, right? You could have 500, 600 in a room. Sometimes it's much more hands on, where I'm just with they'll schedule out. I'm with every team for an hour over the course of a couple days. And so it kind of differs based on the school.
One exercise that you do with your students that was super interesting was the exercise with the core or identity words. Can you kind of explain how that works and why that's important when you want to build your brand?
Yeah, I think most of us, and the thing with student athletes is they don't use it any worse than anybody else, right? They're just in such a spotlight that we act like they're more terrible on social media. I'm like, you go on Facebook, there are a lot of like adults that I'm connected to on Facebook that post things that are light years worse than student athletes. They're just not in the spotlight that student athletes are. But for most of them and for most people, we none of us really have a purpose of why we're on social media. What are we trying to get from it? What are we trying to give to it? And that doesn't mean that people should be there to try to, like, quote unquote, build a brand or have 1 million followers, right? That's not the point either. But it's for student athletes saying, if you don't have a purpose, you're going to get in trouble with it. And so we talk about their core, like the foundation of your strength as an athlete is your core, right? If you don't have a strong core, you're going to get tired quicker. You're just going to be out there kind of flailing around, hurting yourself, hurting other people. But if you have a strong core, that allows you to compete at a higher level, to be a little more intentional. Like, the core is the foundation of your strength. Same thing on social media, and your core is your identity. Like, your identity should drive everything you do on social media. So it's really asking them, who are they and what do they want to be known for? If I'm a student athlete at the University of Oklahoma, say I'm a football player, well, I want to be known as a football player at Oklahoma, and whether I want to be known as that or not doesn't really matter. That is part of my identity. Maybe I want to be also known as a leader. Maybe I want to be known for producing music. Maybe I want to be known for comedy, or that I'm an environmentalist, whatever it may be. It's like, okay, come up with 3 to 4 core words. And these are the things that when people hear your name, what do you want? What do you want to come to mind? Because it's not going to happen on accident, right? If I want you to think I'm a leader, I've got to show you that I'm a leader. Like, I have to do things that leaders do. Now, you're not just going to accidentally think of, oh, well, Kevin, he's a leader. And so to get them to think of these identity words and say, okay, now you got to think about how you use social media. Where's the gap between what you want to be known for and the way you use social media today? What needs to change? What things you need to start talking about? Again, getting them to realize it's not just jokes with your friends. This is employers are following you. Now it's going to be brands who may want to invest in you are following you. So to come up with those 3 to 4 words and put everything that they do on social media kind of through that filter, those kind of being their buckets. And so for me, for a long time, it was social media and athletes, it was social media and sports, leadership and business. And so those things I would talk about the most, so that when people saw my name, that's those are the things that would come to mind.
And so with that, then is that like when you're talking to students about this, is this in a sense of in terms of like building their accounts and building a following and growing their social media, or just in terms of making sure they use it in a smart way and not get themselves in trouble?
Both, right? Because for some want to build a large brand, right? They want to be known, they want to have a lot of followers. Like, great, well, that's not going to happen on accident, right? You're not going to add value if you don't know the value that you're trying to add, right? You have to give people a reason to follow you, a reason to care, a reason to hire you, a reason to engage beyond just being a student athlete. Because there are a lot of student athletes who are big time players at big schools, and they may have a lot of followers, but there's like zero engagement because they're not interesting, right? They're just a noisy college kid. And so for us, like, you can add value or you can add noise. You're not going to add value unless you know what you're trying to become. Now, for some, It may just be, hey, I want to be known as a softball player here and a business major and whatever. Great, but that should still shape how you use social media. Again, it's not about you trying to have 500,000 followers. It's just using it on purpose, and maybe you're using it to get yourself a job. When you graduate, whatever it may be, but just letting the why kind of drive how they use it.
And I'm curious too as to what you tell these students when it comes to hate comments, because obviously being athletes, the microscope is on them. Hate comments are something that are bound to happen no matter what they do. They could be everyone's favorite player one day and everyone's most hated player the next. So what do you communicate to these students? How do you tell them to handle the hate comments and stuff that they get? I know you mentioned earlier on that there was that awful comment that the school got about wanting the players to die in a plane crash. Another more recent example is Charlie D'Amelio on TikTok. She's only 16, but she's getting some awful hate comments. Like, what do you tell these students, these young adults, how to handle hate comments online?
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing, and it's just only gotten worse, as the years have gone on, and fans, it's short for fanatic, and they feel like they have access. They feel like these players owe them something, which again is just all sorts of ridiculous when you actually break it down. The fact that you are getting on the internet and yelling and cussing at and screaming hateful things at a complete stranger, right? It's somebody else's kid. Like, that's just a weird dynamic. And so for student athletes, it's a few things. One, um, it's going to happen, and it has nothing to do with you, right? It has everything to do with the other person. They want to be in your shoes. They wish they were where you are. Something's going on in their life where they're just not happy. It's not your fault, but you can't live with their praise or die by their criticism, right? They're not in the weight room. They're not on the practice field. They're not in your circle. They don't know the work that you put in. And so, unless that criticism is coming from your teammates or your coaches, or maybe your family, like mom and dad, then ignore it. Those people don't get a say in who you are. Like, don't give them more power, because all they really want is a response. And if you respond, even if you're right, you lose that game. Like, there was one of my favorite stories was Robert Griffin, RG3. He was injured and driving to rehab, and he's like sitting in a stoplight or maybe in the parking lot, I don't know. And he's on Instagram. He's got a video, and he's kind of like dancing to Michael Jackson. And it's like, hey, hope you guys have a great day. Like, extremely positive post. And the comments, like, you should be practicing, you should be blah blah. Why are you on Instagram? He's like, look, man, like, number one, I'm literally going to rehab right now to work on getting better. Number two, it's like, do you do your job 24/7, 365? Like, I do have to do other things. And he ended up getting blasted in the media for like engaging with the fans. Like, even when you're right, you're wrong. So for student athletes to realize, like, these people don't get to decide who you are. Um, and so don't give them value. And if you can't, and some can handle it, right? Some can take it and they can get back and forth in a conversation. I'm like, great, you got to know yourself to lead yourself. But if you know that you can't handle that criticism, if it throws you for a loop, then don't check your phone for 24 hours after a game. And then if it gets to a certain level, right, like actual abuse, actual threats, it's like, all right, well, we've got to get authorities involved, got to get certain people involved. And then when you think about the impact, it just keeps kind of building of mental health and anxiety and depression. um, just being aware and checking on your teammates, right? If one of your teammates missed a shot that somebody could think would have won them the game, well, you need to be like checking on them. Don't let them be scrolling through their phone in the room by themselves at night, like just going into this deep hole. It's like, if you see the hate, it's coming. Go check on them. Hey, man, let's go play video games. Let's go hang out, whatever. But just being aware of it and being open about it. But don't let those people decide who you are.
Kind of on the same vein of that, and back to the RG3 story where people were tweeting at him. Do you think once these players reach the professional levels, they should hire someone in to manage their social media for them? Or do you think that that loses too much of the authenticity and that they should still be managing it when they reach the highest level?
I think both. I think that authenticity matters, and fans are generally pretty smart. Like, they can tell when it's not the player. But I think it's also fine to have someone helping you manage it, right? Where it's, especially if it's sponsored posts or stuff from brand partners, like, you may want to have someone guiding you with that, so you're not making mistakes. You may want to have someone just checking your mentions every now and then. If I were an athlete, I would say it's my brand, it's my personality. I want to own that. I want it to be authentic. Now I would be saying, help me, help me make sure I'm doing it the right way. But I want this. I want to be the one actually pressing send. I want to be the thoughts to be mine. I want the interactions to be mine. Now again, when you get to that level, some can handle that just fine. Some can't. Right? There's some that just shouldn't be on social media. But then you've got some they're able to be online, to engage with fans, to interact with people, and still go perform at a higher level. It's like great. So each player kind of has to figure out their own balance.
Is there ever a thought process to use Fieldhouse and work with professional athletes, or even go the opposite way and work with high school athletes? Why do you specialize with college students?
Yes, and so I've had some conversations with pro teams. It's a little bit of a different beast with players unions and agents and a lot of that stuff. Teams can't control a whole lot of what players do, so it's really about getting in with like rookie symposium type stuff when they bring players in at the beginning of their careers. Um, in high school, I've done a few high school, mostly local. They absolutely need it. It's more of a budget issue. High school certainly can't pay what a college can for me to fly around the country. Now, some high schools who have asked, I'll say, I'd love to, and I'd love to do a reduced fee if you've got a relationship with a university nearby where I can double up, or if you want to make it a community event, you get 3 or 4 high schools where you can make it work for everyone. Awesome. Um, I think it should be mandatory at the high school level, where digital citizenship or whatever we want to call it is taught, not just student athletes, but to high school students. So I've had some conversations with people about building out some online programs to try to get it into the high school world. I've done a little bit there, but there's absolutely a need.
Has the move to bring it online and create online programs, has that been expedited now with the coronavirus and not being able to go to these campuses in person?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because I'm not against online learning. I'm generally against online learning with a lot of the social media stuff, or at least that I do with schools. It just feels like in person is so much more effective. And if it's online, it can easily be a box that gets checked, and they can watch your videos and not really watch the videos, and go through the system and whatever. It feels like I can make a significant amount of money doing that, but I want to do it in a way that actually makes an impact. Because for me, it's about making sure they get what they actually need and get it the right way. And so it's becoming more common now with this whole situation. People are a little more used to um, the online thing where they, 7 months ago, they like, what do you mean online? And so it's becoming a little more of a norm. And so I think there will be some opportunity for that moving forward. And in my opinion, it just has to be done the right way.
And in terms of making an impact with these students, you've spoken to over 120,000 students. Do you often reflect on that number, that you've impacted 120,000 different lives through this business?
Not until just now. Um, yeah, it's weird. Like it, it's really weird because I'm my personality. I tend to look forward. I don't look back a whole lot. I'm learning to reflect more often, usually just on the day that happened, but should probably get better about reflecting on what was and what has been, because it's crazy. I've been doing this for about 10 years and been all over the country. And I get emails from student athletes that I talked to 6 7 years ago of, hey, I remember when you said this was incredible. Or hey, I don't, you don't know me, you were at this session this year, blah blah blah. I took what you said and like I got a job because of it, and they said it was because of my social media presence. So it's that stuff, because you always wonder, right? Like you believe in what you're doing, you hope that it's adding value, you hope that it's impacting people, and then you start to get stories like that, and for me that's just fuel. Like, all right, it's working. They're listening, they're engaging. It's making a difference. Let's keep going. But to put kind of a number on it, um, it is a pretty fascinating thing to think about.
No, it's awesome. It's just I remember finding that number when I was doing my research, and I couldn't believe it. It's incredible. I just want to congratulate you on that. And I also want to kind of pivot, change gears here a little bit to your first book, I Athlete. You published it in 2013, and if I'm not mistaken, so this is essentially everything you're doing with Fieldhouse Media. You're able to kind of put those lessons into a book, right? That was kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah, it was this idea of um, kind of me wanting to really establish myself as the leader in that space. Get something. I mean, be honest, it's a terrible book. Um, at the time, you're proud of it, like you think it's great. Like looking back, like, oh, I actually had a conversation with a friend recently of kind of revamping that, because so much has changed, right, in however many 7 years. Um, but yeah, the idea was just to get something out into that field, um, to get my thoughts really solidified and help people understand like where I was going, what I was about, why this is so much of a need, even if they don't use me. Like, this is the conversation that we need to be having with student athletes. The conversations we have matters. Who has those conversations with them matters. And this is not just a game. It's not just social media isn't a fad; it's a thing, and we've got to be really intentional. And so it was just kind of a way to get that message out there in a more formal way.
And so, kind of, you said it was a terrible book. I'm sure it was better than that. But I want to ask because obviously, writing it in 2013, that was 7 years ago. Social media has changed a lot. Like, how has the space and even your presentations changed from when you started doing this business 10 years ago to now when you go into a school today?
Yeah, it's interesting because the presentation actually hasn't changed a ton. Now, over the last year and moving forward, it will just because of the name, image, likeness, and student athletes with the potential um, that we're anticipating where they're going to be able to actually capitalize off of their social media presence, like while they're in school, not just after school. So that kind of adds a layer of urgency for both sides. But for me, it's never really been about the platforms, right? So when I started this, Facebook was still was the platform. Twitter was becoming a big deal. Instagram didn't exist. Snapchat didn't exist. YouTube's there, but it's not like a lot of players had YouTube channels. Like a few do, but um, and so for the truly social media, it was Facebook and some Twitter. Well, now it's most of them. They're still on Facebook. They obviously don't use it as much as they used to. They're still on Twitter. They don't use it near as much as they used to. They use Instagram in different ways, and then Snapchat is a beast for that generation. So for me, it's really been less about the platforms and more about the behaviors. And so I'm not now. I need to understand what platforms they're using, right? If I'm up talking about MySpace, like they're going to tune me out. But for me, it's like let's understand the platforms that they're using and why they're using these platforms and try to relate to them. Like I can't come in being some old guy and being way out of touch, but I also can't come in and try to act like I'm one of them, right? Like they see through that so fast, this generation. But it's more about the behaviors saying, I don't care if you're on TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it may be, whatever comes next. It's about the behaviors. It's about the way you're presenting yourself. And that carries across platforms.
And the way you present yourself on social media now, as you mentioned, is going to carry so much more weight with the ability for players to monetize off of their likeness and their social media. So, what was your reaction when you first heard that news when the NCAA made that announcement that they were going to start allowing players to use their name and likeness to make money starting, I believe it was in 2021, they're going to start doing that?
Yeah, overall, I love it. There are a lot of details to be worked out about how it gets played out. I think that will be a burden on schools because they're going to have to figure out how do they manage it. Do they need to staff up to help players manage this stuff? But on the surface, I think it's great. Um, if a kid, now, I remember I was at a school. I don't know which school it was, but it was a D3 school. This is probably 5 years ago, and there was a basketball player at a D3 school. This is when Vine was a big deal. So however long ago that was, and this kid, I was actually close to Canada. I was probably in New Hampshire or Vermont, to be honest with you. And this kid had 285,000 Vine followers, and it was because of how he dances. Like he's an incredible dancer. So he'd set his phone up and do some what kind of like TikTok is now, to be honest with you. Um, and he had just kind of blown up. I'm like, man, he could be making some decent money off of that. Uh, and so I think that's where the value is. It's I talked with a guy named Blake Lawrence who runs a company called Open Doors, and this is part of what they do. They help get content into athletes' hands and help schools kind of figure out a lot of this stuff. We had him on our podcast recently. And he said, a lot of these kids, we act like there's going to be all these kids making 50,000, 100,000, whatever. He's like, that's not true. There may be four, that make that kind of money. He's like, but for the other kid who can get $500 a month, he's like, that may be 1,000% increase in what they're taking home right now. He's like, what kid doesn't want 1,000% increase? Like, even if it's $500, like that's a win. And so I think it will be overall a good thing. Again, how it's managed and all the rules and regulations that come out are still to be determined and what that looks like. But I think it's a big win.
No, I agree. And I was going to ask you, like, since you mentioned that other company there, they're in a similar space, but a little bit different. What's competition like? I'm sure it's a little bit more like there's a little bit more competition now than there was back in 2011. But with your business, I'm assuming that people aren't buying very often, right? It's probably every 4 years you're taking trips back to schools because as kind of the students churn and they age out. So what's competition like now, and how often are you going back to the same schools?
Honestly, there's zero competition. And what I mean by that is there are people who dabble in that space. Nobody whose focus is just on social media education. There may be people who are TV reporters who work in that space every now and then. Open Doors, Blake's company, education isn't their thing. they'll do it, when they're asked, but coming in and actually educating student athletes has not been their priority. And so he and I, Blake and I have always talked like we essentially complement each other. What I don't do, they come in and do really well. Where they leave off, I come in and do it really well. And so there are a few people who have tried to kind of come in and out of the space over the years, but nobody who's just made that kind of a real specific priority. It's always just kind of been an added benefit of something that they do. And it's yeah, so I'm usually out. I mean, it depends. Some schools I go out every year, because like, hey, we get freshmen in every year, we get transfers in every year, and it's just a message that our student athletes honestly can't hear enough. Others, it's on a 2 to 3 year cycle, but it usually is just once a year. Some schools, they're outliers. There are a few who have brought me in 2 to 3 times a year, and you start building out, getting even more in depth and even more intentional than you could do in an hour, with 500 student athletes. But generally, it's probably averages every other year.
And when did culture wins come into the picture? When did you start expanding? Well, actually, it's a two-pronged question. So this one's more focused on leadership as opposed to social media education. Why create a second company as opposed to adding that as an offering of Fieldhouse Media?
I don't have an answer for that. That's a great question. Probably because I just saw them as two separate things, um, and it's really interesting because my personality is kind of be jack of all trades, do whatever people want. If they want this, great, we'll do that. If they want this, great, we'll do that. Um, and it might have made sense, to just have one organization and we do this and this, and could have added this, as time went on. But I just saw them as two very separate things, and so started, doing all the social media stuff. Kind of gave me a seat at the table, um, to have conversations with athletic directors, with coaches, with people in the space about culture, about leadership, about what was working, about what doesn't. And so I just knew there was a gap, right, in that world. And it's not unique to college sports. And I've done stuff with pro sports and high school sports, and it's obviously true in the business world and education and healthcare. But most of quote unquote leader development is bringing a motivational speaker and kind of hope for the best. And I love motivational speakers, but they don't really change culture, right? It's like this church camp high, like that was amazing, and they leave, and 2 weeks later, you're like, but I don't really know what to do with that. So I guess we go back to what we were doing. And so I didn't have a solution for that. So I just started Fieldhouse Leadership, um, which was actually 5 years ago, or so I guess six years ago, 2014. Um, it the idea was early on was just to be a daily email, just try to kind of encourage people, inspire people, to give them a daily thought, for leaders in the sports world. And then sometime within there, probably within under a year, I had ads and coaches saying, hey, will you come out and do, I'm loving your emails, will you come do staff sessions, like do staff retreats for our team? I was like, oh, yes, but ethically, I don't really have anything, so I didn't feel right saying yes to that because I didn't have any systems or real content. I just had a bunch of thoughts. And so it was about that time that my friend Jeremy Kubicek, who my wife had worked for, whenever we were dating, why we moved to Oklahoma City, um, he had been all around the world at that point. He was living in London and moving back to Oklahoma City, and said, hey, here's what I'm working on. I just wanted to show you. And I said, that's awesome. Whatever that is, I need it. But that's the missing piece for college sports. And so that's when we kind of partner with them to actually have content and systems and actual things to give to teams and leaders besides just kind of a daily thought in an email.
Okay. And I was going to ask you one of my favorite quotes that I wrote down. I believe I heard you on another podcast. Maybe that's where I wrote this down from, but it's call people up, not out. Can you kind of explain the distinction between calling people up versus calling them out?
Yeah. So this is huge, not just in sports, but just in the way you interact with people, right? So people are going to mess up. People are going to fall short of the standard. Um, People are going to have bad days. They're going to have bad moments. Like we're human. Regardless of our commitment level, we're going to fall short. And so it's how we respond to people in that moment kind of starts to shape A, our influence with them, but B, who they become and how they respond. So you think, um, we had, I'll just give you a story from my kids. They don't play soccer anymore, but when they used to play soccer, my oldest, we had a game against a team that their goalie wasn't great, and we scored a couple easy goals that we shouldn't have scored. The kid should have stopped us, and his coach is just losing his mind. It's like, Jeff, what is wrong with you? Jeff, get your head in the game. Stop the ball. You know that's your job, right, Jeff? Stop. And I'm just like, wow. Number one, calm down. These kids are like 8 years old. You may need some help. Maybe you shouldn't be coaching. Like this may be too much for you. But he's just shaming this kid. and you just see like the kid's whole body language changes, right? And his head droops, and he knows he messed up, right? He's not dumb. He's not like celebrating that we scored a goal on them. Well, on the flip side, uh, our goalie was actually pretty good, and they scored a goal that they shouldn't have scored on us. And I was helping coach. I was the assistant coach because I knew nothing about soccer. But the head coach was like, "Hey, Patrick, Bob, you're good, all good. Hey, remember what we practice, right? Hands out, be big, run at them. You've got it, just like you practice. You'll get them next time." And so one was calling somebody out and shaming them and tearing them down. One was calling them up, saying, "Hey, no, you're good. You've got it. You've practiced this. You know what to do. Just live into that." So it's reminding both of them like, "Hey, the standard wasn't acceptable. So where are you going to be? Am I going to like shame you and call you out and embarrass you? Well, that doesn't make anybody want to be better. It just makes them angry. But if you remind people of who they are, that's what calling them up is, saying, "Hey, your potential is up here. You're living down here. And I'm not mad at you. Like, I want you to get back up here. And what do you need from me to get back up there?" So it's just the way we respond to people in the midst of their struggles.
No, I love that. I heard that and I was like, I definitely had to ask you about that. But I'm assuming it's lessons like that that you would include in your email newsletter. And you said it was daily. And if my math is, if the number I have is correct, you sent 1,300 of those daily emails. How do you come up with new content every single day to put in those?
That number's probably close to being right. Because I don't remember when, I guess I started that 6 years ago. And so it's got to be, yeah, I take the weekends off. So I don't do Saturday and Sunday, and usually don't do holidays. Um, but I mean, it's almost, it's probably 340 days a year. I mean, I don't know the number on that, but you're probably pretty close. Um, and it's really interesting because there are days I'm like, do people care about this? This is a lot. And then that's just me being negative because it's not a lot, right? It's one email a day. Um, and sometimes it's a paragraph, sometimes it's two sentences, sometimes it's four paragraphs. It just kind of depends where my head's at. What it has, that's as much for me as anyone, because it's what it's forcing me to do is be aware of lessons that are happening around me. And that was one thing I've just learned from speakers, from content creators. Like, I'm like, where do they get these stories? Like, this is insane. And all they're just aware of life, because there are stories happening all around. It could be a story from my kid's soccer game. It could be hiking with my kids. It could be something I saw in the airport. It could be, I mean, just getting ideas from all over the place. And so for me, it's about being aware, of what's going on around me, and is there something in this moment that actually applies to something bigger, that maybe somebody else would find useful. And so I sit down either, again, not a big planner, but either the night before or the morning of. So sometimes the email goes out at 7 o'clock Central every day, Monday through Friday, and sometimes it's 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm awake and writing that email. But they really don't take me that much time. But it's mostly just I'll sit down and say, okay, what do I want people to know? What happened today? What mattered? And how do I put that into a message?
I love that, using life to inspire the content you create. That's the best way to keep coming up with new ideas. And you took those we'll say the 1,300 emails, and you took the best 365 and turned them into a book. Leadership Interrupted: Daily Inspiration to Become the Leader You Were Meant to Be. Was this book easier to write than iAthlete because you already had the book written essentially with these emails, or was it harder to have to go through all 1,300 emails to pick your favorite ones to put in this book?
Yes, both. It was easier because, like, people say, "Oh, this is like you wrote a book." I didn't write a book. I wrote a bunch of emails and put them in a book. And so it's just a very different process, right? And so it's trying to figure out, and I use Mailchimp for my daily email, and there was no real way. I mean, there's no way to measure like which emails are the best. You know what I mean? Because I'm not writing them to get responses, but some I get a bunch of responses, some I get none. There's no real call to action. It's just, here's all the emails, and I didn't have a way to export them into like a Word document where I could just scroll through. And so I'm having to like literally go by email by email by email. Um, and so it was an interesting process. I've actually thought about. I don't love the name of that one. I've thought about rebranding it and re-releasing it and just calling it 5 Minute Leadership. Um, and maybe I'll just do that with kind of a volume two. But it was definitely a different process than iAthlete.
And so this book became a bestseller, right? Like, what's what goes into a book becoming a bestseller?
Let you into the underworld of publishing. So it means nothing. If it were a New York Times bestseller, it would mean something. If it were Wall Street Journal bestseller, it would mean something. Although even then, uh, as I've studied the publishing world, right, I try to be like, if I'm going to spend time doing things, I try to become a student of that craft. And so publishing has been one of those worlds, just like speaking or communicating. And as I studied bestsellers, because everyone wants to write a bestseller, right? Like if you're writing, like you want to write a best, and I knew like that one's like it's a daily, almost like devotional type thing. It's probably not going to be a bestseller, but you could sell 15,000 copies in a week and not make the New York Times bestsellers list, even though usually it's like 7 to 11,000 kind of usually gets you on the list. You could sell 15, 20. They can kind of pick whoever they want to pick. So there's no real rhyme or reason or formula. My business partner, their book sold well enough to be on the list last year. A book of theirs that came out, but because they were bulk orders, like people were selling them and hosting events around it, which was the plan, and the publisher knew that. New York Times like, hey, something's fishy here, so they didn't include any of it, which is just weird. So it's a weird process, but Amazon is very different. And so I do self-publishing. I don't deal with a publisher. I don't deal with any of that. I write. I pay someone to edit it, pay someone to design it, and then I put it on Amazon myself. So I have full control over it. I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to do. That's been the way that I've preferred it. But on Amazon, you can choose the categories that your book is in, right? So for me to compete against like a John Maxwell book, that's not going to go well. To put it in just a general leadership category, it's not going to do well. But if you pick still relevant categories but smaller categories, then you can sell enough. And I mean, you get into, if I would write a book about fishing tackle, I don't know what I would write, but I could probably sell 3 and be a bestseller, right? 'Cause probably not a lot of competition in that kind of subcategory. But so whatever categories that Leadership Interactive was in, it was around sports, and it was around sports coaching and sports leadership, a few of those things. It was a bestseller in a couple different categories. And so that's kind of the Amazon game, so to speak, is you don't have to sell 20,000 copies. You could probably sell 500, maybe less, and be a bestseller if it's the right category. Now, you could also be really shady with that, right? It's like, oh, I wrote a book about sports leadership. I'm going to put it in like underwater knitting, and be a bestseller that way, even though it's completely irrelevant. So you want to have some integrity and be in maybe smaller categories, but ones that are still relevant.
That's super interesting. I didn't actually know that. That'd be a great way. Obviously, if you do it ethically, it's a great way to become a bestseller, which then allows you to market the book as a bestseller, which of course draws more interest because people always look
That's
for
right.
social proof, and a bestseller obviously means social proof. So I think that's super interesting. I never actually knew that. And I'm curious too, if you can tell me a little bit more about your new book, Keep Chopping Wood. So what was the idea behind this book? If I'm not mistaken, it came out today, right?
That's right. So we're recording this May 19th. I think it's May 19th. Came out today. It is already a bestseller in 3 different categories, which is fun. Um, and so I had an idea, or had a thought. So late in January, and this is again the beauty of the self-publishing process. If I had a traditional publisher, this book probably wouldn't be out for another several months, maybe longer, because there's such a long process. But I had an idea in January. It was freezing, and one of our neighbors, actually has a wood burning fireplace, and we're sitting there watching TV late at night, and I'm smelling, the wood from their fireplace, which I love that smell. And for some reason, I'm weird, but I had a thought about like my neighbor out chopping wood. I was like, man, and which I know he didn't do. He probably goes and buys the wood, somewhere. But I'm like, I wonder, he wouldn't go out and chop that wood today. Like that wouldn't, if he did chop it, he wouldn't have gone out today. Like you got to store it up. There got to be a process. And so I just a quick Google search realized that the process of wood being ready to burn, being ready to put in the fireplace is like a 9 to 12, sometime longer, but 9 to 12 months long process. It's got to dry out. It's got what it basically call it. It's got to be seasoned, because if you chop wood today and put it in your fireplace, like it's not ready. It's too wet. It's just going to be super smoky. It's not going to catch fire. If it does anything, it's probably going to just damage your fireplace and potentially actually burn your house down. And so that means somebody is out chopping wood 9 months ago, 12 months ago, realizing that it's not for today, right? Like it's not going to be useful. There's a process to it. So I fired out. I was like, that's really interesting. That's kind of like Teams. And so I sent this tweet out at 10:30 on January 11th. It said, you don't chop wood because you need it today. You chop it today so you have it when you need a fire tomorrow. Your team will face adversity. Do the work today to build relational trust and culture so when adversity hits, you can overcome. Make sure you have wood for the fire. And so then I go to bed and I tell my wife, I'm like, yeah, I think I just had a great idea for a book. And she's like, I'm sure you did. It's a day that ends in day. So that sounds about right because I just have tons of ideas. And I don't usually follow through with these ideas, right? I'm just an idea person. I don't usually don't usually commit to those ideas. Wake up the next morning and that tweet had blown up. Like I think like as I sit here today, again, I say blow up for me, so relatively speaking. Um, 344 retweets, 1,000 likes. It's been seen by 138,000 people. And but I woke up and at that time it probably had 100 retweets, and I was like, I told my wife, I was like, hey, remember that idea? And she's like, yes. I was like, it kind of blew up. Like, I think that's kind of real. Like, that's resonating with people. She's like, okay, interesting. And so that was on Sunday morning. On Monday, I used it in my daily Culture Wins email. I used this idea of chopping wood in the process. And, again, I've been writing a daily email now for however long, 6 years. And I may get 1 to 2 responses a day. And I don't write it to get a response. It's not the point of it. It's just to give people thoughts. But every now and then I'm like, hey, this is great. Hey, this is perfect. What I need to hear today, whatever. That one, I mean, legitimately 30, 40, 50 people are like, oh my goodness, I just printed this off and gave it to my kid. I just printed the copies of this email and gave it to our team. I just forwarded this to everyone. I'm like, okay, that's 2 for 2. There's something there is resonating. And so the next morning, Tuesday, I sat down and in 4 hours had it written.
So how long is it? If you're able to write in 4 hours, how long is the book then?
It's like 9,000. So it's short story, kind of fable style.
Okay, gotcha. And I was curious too with this book, on top of it, on top of releasing a book, you decided to create a launch team, leveraging your social media following and your connections to create this launch team. Can you kind of talk to me about that idea? I thought that was super fascinating.
Yeah, so I did that with Leadership Interrupted. And what I've learned about book launches, again, trying to study the craft of publishing and writing and launching, um, it's the really a lot of the success around a book is relative to the launch team, right? It's like people, it's great if they know who I am, want to buy my message, whatever it may be. Um, my network is very limited. Like it just has to be people that follow me or may have heard of me. But if I can get a bunch of other people interested in the message, passionate about the message, um, committed to sharing the message, well, then I get my network grows exponentially, right? And it really doesn't matter how big your launch team is. If it could be 5 people, well, that makes your network still significantly larger. If you get a few hundred, then it's a complete game changer. And so for me, I put it out. So during this whole season, one of the benefits of this COVID season is like I wouldn't have sat down and finished the book, like the whole process of finishing it yet. I probably would have waited to release it, July or August, September. I would have found all sorts of fears and insecurities and reasons, to keep putting it off. But the world kind of slowed down, so I was like, actually, this is a perfect message for this time because it feels like the work doesn't matter for a lot of people, whether you're an athlete or whatever. But no, you keep doing the work today so that you're ready when the time comes. Like this is actually a perfect time. And so I've decided to put a launch team together without a release date because I just wasn't sure how long it was going to take me, and I had to get some stuff designed. Um, but I just said, hey, if you sign up, you get a free copy of the book. You get kind of behind the scenes access to kind of see what a book launch looks like. You get your name in the book, and kind of get to be a part of what I hope is something special and meaningful. And so you give people some reasons to join and reasons to get excited. They feel ownership, and it's really cool for them to be able to see their name in the book. Um, and so then, this morning, I was telling my business partner, I had calls all morning, so I'm still working in this season, still investing in teams, and so it was probably 10 o'clock before I was really able to check social media, or spend some time on social media. And I was like, but it's been great because the message is still getting out and it's not reliant upon me. Like my mentions are filled with people talking about the book, which is overwhelming in a number of ways, but also just really encouraging. It's like, great. It doesn't have to be me. Like it's my message, my book, but there's so many people who are believing in it, investing in it. And so to have a launch team it's just incredibly humbling that people care enough, right? It's like, no, I believe in the message. I believe in you. And it's more than my mom, like that's nice. But for people to believe in that, it's pretty incredible. But for me, that feels like the real key to really anything, whether it's a book or a product or whatever it may be. Having a community that believes in it is really powerful.
That's awesome. And so then this community, then they essentially helped build the book as well, right? I believe the cover was designed by somebody on the launch team.
Well, no, so the cover was designed. I didn't have a cover guy yet. And I texted a buddy of mine who works in college sports. Said, "Hey, man, you know designers. Do you have anybody in mind?" And so Trey Jackson, who's one of the graphic designers for University of Rice, I don't know if he's just football team or just all of Rice athletics. He designed the cover and just nailed it. Um, like when the email came in, like I audibly gasped. Like I didn't. I was doing something else. I wasn't fully paying attention when I opened the email, and then when I realized what it was like, oh my goodness! Like it was just I was so pumped. And then, but one of the guys on the launch team, I hope I say his name right. It's either Andy Scoggin or Andy Scoggin. Sorry, Andy, if you're listening. Um, I was really struggling with the subtitle. So I had Keep Chopping Wood, but I couldn't land on the subtitle. And so I asked the launch team, I was like, give me your thoughts. And so Andy came up with an ordinary approach to achieving extraordinary success. And I was like, yes, that's perfect. So that's kind of the fun part of the launch team is like it's you can just use it to use people, right, to get your name and product out. But for me, like I really wanted them to feel involved and to actually be a part of the process and feel some ownership.
That's awesome. And so you said that it's already a bestseller right now, and it literally came out today.
Yeah, as we sit right now, it is a number one bestseller in sports coaching on Amazon and in 1 hour self-help reads, I believe was the other category.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, top 10 in three categories right now, which is fun.
That's awesome. I was going to ask, so just kind of changing gears here a little bit to another quote I have written down. And it was, "We have more tools to be more efficient than ever, yet we're busier than ever." I was curious as to why that is, like why you think that is.
It's really fascinating. We are obsessed with productivity, right? And efficiency. Yet, so we should be able to get more work done in less amount of time. Um, and yet, people are busier than they've ever been, right? Burnout is extreme. Work life balance. I mean, as I sit here, I'm just going to Google work life balance while we're sitting here talking. Um, work life balance. There are I don't know what that number is. 1.8 billion results 1.8 billion results on Google on a work-life balance, which tells me like we're not doing very well, right? Everyone's talking about it. Nobody, like everyone's just saying, "Hey, we're really out of balance," and nobody's really giving a way to combat that. And so but it's just fascinating to me. It's like, why? Why are you having to work at 10 o'clock at night? And we're just so inefficient. We have all these tools to like automate things, to make us better, to make us more organized, but I think I think people now, we just feel we think busyness is a badge of honor. um, and we feel like if we're not working, we're falling behind or we're missing something or somebody else is going to get ahead of us. Instead of just saying, no, I worked hard today, so I'm going to quit. I'm going to go hang out with my family, do whatever I do. And the other piece is people just are really inefficient at work. We're constantly interrupted, whether it's from Slack or Google Chat or emails or phone calls. Like we don't actually schedule time just to get uninterrupted work done. And so people are busy, but they're not productive.
And so, like, what are some ways that we can become less busy and focus on what matters? Is it, like you said, just scheduling in that time to make sure it gets done? Or like, what are some of your tips to do that?
Yeah, so we actually have a system we use with teams called the 5 gears. And instead of work-life balance, it's about being present and being productive and knowing when to be which one of those. And so I'll just do the 20-second version. Fifth gear is door shut or headphones on, no email, no social media, no interruptions. Like I'm just focused on work. Um, and nobody, we get very little of that time. Like most leaders and teams I talk to, I'm like, what would happen if you got an extra hour of that a week? They're like, oh my gosh, my life would be totally different. But they never schedule it. Fourth gear is you're cranking out an email and someone comes in, then you get a text, and then you check Twitter, and you're doing several things at once. Fourth gear is where most of us just spend all of our time. We wake up in fourth gear, right, checking our email or social media before we ever get out of bed. And then we're stuck in fourth gear mode all day. And then we check our email right before we go to sleep. And so we're waking up and going to sleep in fourth gear, kind of in go mode. Third gear is social, hang out, go play golf, go have some drinks with friends, go to the movies, just hanging out, right? Not work talk, not deep life talk, just hanging out. Second gear is connect, where it's maybe date night or one-on-one with a friend, coffee with a friend, one-on-one with a teammate. Hey, how are you really doing? Getting a little bit deeper in conversation. And then first gear is rest and recharge. And nobody does that. We're all burnt out because we're crashing, not resting, right? We binge watch um, season 3 of Ozark in a day, as opposed to like watching a couple episodes every night. And so for us, it's figuring out, we need every gear every day, but when do you need to be in what gear at what time? There's a time to work and there's a time to be with people. And if you're in the wrong gear at the wrong time, you're going to undermine your influence, right? If I'm in third gear trying to hang out and chit chat, but people are in fifth gear trying to get work done, well, I'm now preventing them, which means I'm undermining my influence. Or if I'm in fifth gear or fourth gear trying to get work done, and it's we're all hanging out, having fun watching TV. Like, hey man, get off your phone. Like, we're trying to hang out, and you're sending emails. So really, it's about understanding what gear to be in and when. But as it relates to productivity, it's really about making sure you schedule that fifth gear time to where you're not interrupted, so you can be balanced in the other areas.
Would taking time to yourself to just kind of reflect on your life, would that fall under gear 5 or gear 2? Because gear 5 is obviously like headphones in, dialed in, making sure you're getting what you need to done on your own. But gear 2 is more so kind of like checking in on your friends and making sure they're okay. What gear would you put kind of doing like checking in on your friends, but checking in on yourself? Like what gear would that fall under?
I would say first gear. So that's a way of like rest and recharge, of reflecting. So like, I start my day in first gear, where I'm like, I'll read, I may journal a little bit. Some people, like, running for me is actually first gear. It's where I kind of clear my head and get some perspective. To be end of the day, where you're reflecting on the day, journaling, people who meditate, whatever it may be. Um, but I would call that first gear. Like, that's when kind of you're investing in you, and kind of restoring your energy.
Got you. Okay. I was just curious about that. That's awesome. I was going to ask, kind of switching back over to social media quickly. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but if you had to get rid of every single social media, but keep one, which one would you keep?
Oh, I keep Twitter in a heartbeat. It's not even close for me. Now I say that, I love Instagram. Um, but Twitter for me, I have a job because of Twitter. I've been able to travel around the country because of Twitter. I'm connected to people who I think are unbelievably interesting and fascinating, that I get to learn from. Have built great connections through Twitter. I mean, I can go in almost any town in the country and be able to meet up with someone for dinner or a drink or coffee, because we've interacted on Twitter. And so for me, like, it is such a valuable platform. It's where I get news. It's where I hang out and talk sports. It's where I've built a professional platform. I mean, I love Twitter.
And so how do you grow your Twitter to that point? Like because I believe you have over 13,000 followers on Twitter now. I think I'm sitting at just under 700. So I can't go everywhere and meet people for dinner if I were to go to a different city in the country. But how do you get to that point? Like what are some of your tips or like your cliff notes as to how you were able to grow your Twitter to that scale?
And honestly, I have no idea how I did this. It's been yeah, because here's the thing for me. Uh, it's and this is why, again, not trying to be prideful or ego here. This is why I think my message with student athletes, when people works, when you're talking about social media, is because I'm not anybody. Like, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not an athlete that had a platform. Like, I was just a guy on Twitter. And change and I don't really care, about having 100,000 followers. I couldn't tell you how many I have, but it's for me, everything started to change when I started to decide what I wanted to be known for. Because when I first got on Twitter, again, I had no purpose. And so nobody cared, right? I'd be like, oh, I'm tired. Oh, guess I'll go to work. Oh, I'm in the line at McDonald's again. Oh, here's a Bieber song. Oh, I'm so, yeah. And just kind of the way everyone used to use Twitter or any social media, just kind of a brain dump of noise. It's like, why would anybody engage with that? And so when I started having purpose, for me, it was two things: having a purpose and trying to add value and connect with people. So, like, I love people. And so inserting yourself in conversations on topics that you care about consistently, builds influence, builds relationship, and that's how you become part of a community. Because Twitter is just all these little communities, around 1,000 different topics, right? Like, there's NBA Twitter, well, there's social media and sports Twitter, well, there's sports business Twitter. I mean, there's anything, there's political Twitter, there's all sorts of stuff, right? But you find the things that you're interested in, and you insert yourself into those conversations in a thoughtful way, relating to people, adding value to people, connecting, congratulating people. And so for me, and that's a natural extension of who I am. Like, I love connecting with people, and so Twitter it's been almost second nature for me, kind of the way the platform is operated. Once I decided like who I wanted to be and how I wanted to use it, it just became second nature. So I think it's too many are saying, how can I build my brand? You do that by serving others.
I love that. I love that. And at what point did you get verified?
Oh, I have no idea. It was actually a joke. Somebody applied because they opened it up for for applying a while back, and somebody jokingly applied, and it and it went through. So I don't actually know how that happened.
Fair enough. But I want to ask you, like, what is next for you? What do you have coming up?
Oh gosh, what do I have coming up? Well, nothing for quite a while because I can't leave Oklahoma. Um,
Fair.
no, it's been a really interesting season. I was supposed to be at the Final Four, talking to a bunch of coaches and athletic directors. Had a bunch of speaking engagements that aren't canceled; they're just postponed. But what's next is really trying to figure out how do we best do virtual experiences, because I think that will be travel will come back. I fully believe. I hope. 'Cause I love traveling. Um, I've still been really busy. So like this season, it's a really weird dynamic because I know that it's been devastating for a lot of people and really difficult. For me, it's been the polar opposite. Like I'm busier than I've ever been, and so I'm incredibly grateful for technology because teams still want to get better, leaders still want to get better, and so Zoom has worked. They've realized they can do that through Zoom calls or whatever platform, and so it's been really fun for me. Now I'm really thinking about how do I do that. We use the phrase all the time: "Be intentional, not accidental." Using Zoom is fine, but it's also very accidental just because and fill in Zoom with Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, whatever. It doesn't matter what the platform is, but just using that is accidental. So, well, let's just do this video call because we can. Now we're thinking, how do we make that like an actual experience? Where because you've got to be good at it because it's totally different than giving a keynote because people now can turn off their camera and go do whatever they want to do. And so it's what do you do to keep because content matters, but the delivery matters. And so for us, it's how do we do virtual, not just video calls, but how do we do virtual experiences really well to help leaders and teams get better?
And so beyond virtual experiences, what is your long-term goal? We're talking like 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Like, what are you striving for?
Um, to change the culture in American sports. I mean, I would say global, but we'll think small and just say American sports. Now, will that happen in my lifetime? No, but it's I want. And I'm not trying to say the culture of American sports is necessarily broken or bad or whatever, um, but I just think it can be a lot better. And I think that as leaders get healthier, as leaders become more self aware, um, they will lead better, and that means their teams will get better, and the whole experience becomes better for everyone. So for me, it's about how do we change the culture? How do we change the leadership culture in American sports?
I love that. But before I let you go, I want to ask you the same standard set of questions that I ask every single person. I used to call this section rapid fire, but then people are telling me these weren't really rapid fire questions. So I started calling it the Q&A, but then I realized it's a podcast and the whole thing is a Q&A, so that doesn't really make sense. But either way, so I don't really have a name for this section. But the first question is you're going to dinner, you can take three people, it can be anybody dead or alive. Who do you take to dinner?
Who would I take? Three people, dead or alive. Man, I should be so prepared for this. Um, 'Cause I've been asked that before, but I'm never ready for that. Um, who would I take? Because three is so difficult. Like I love people, and like so I could think of 1,000 different people for 1,000 different reasons. Um, I'm going to say Greg Popovich, Winston Churchill, and oh man, Nelson Mandela.
Awesome. What is some of the best advice you've ever gotten?
Ooh, I've kind of already mentioned it. Well, two. One, be intentional, not accidental. That kind of flipped my life upside down 4 or 5 years ago because my life was great. It was fine, but it was all accidental. I was never really living with full purpose. I was kind of letting things happen. And again, good things were happening. But to wake up and to choose to be intentional every day was just in every facet, right? In my work, when I'm with teams, with my family, with friends, like just a game changer. The other one is a combo of shut up and slow down because I move way too fast and I talk way too much. And so almost every boss I've had is like, hey, you just need to shut up, and they mean that in a kind way. Like usually it's because I was trying to do sales calls and I would ask the question and I would never let them like there'd be 10 seconds or 5 seconds of silence and I start panicking and talking. So then I end up losing tons of money that didn't have to happen. Like, hey, if you just shut up, they would be fine. But for me as my personality, the more I shut up, the more other people get to speak. And the more I listen, the better everyone can get.
What is one thing about you people would not expect?
Ooh. One thing about me people would not expect. I don't know. Maybe that I'm extremely emotional. Like I will cry at the drop of a hat. Like I can watch a commercial for The Biggest Loser, and I'll be weeping. Um, I cry all the time, so maybe that.
Fair enough. I appreciate you being open enough to share that. For the final question, I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have this crystal ball and you can ask this crystal ball anything and you'll get the answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
What is? Oh my gosh, Jacob, you're killing me, man. In a good way. What is one question I want to know? I feel like I'd be better if you just interviewed me every day. Like it just makes me think about think about a lot of different things in different ways. So it's good. What is one question I really want to know the answer to? Um, this is gonna be really disappointing. Like nothing's gonna. As I'm just saying, I can talk all the time. My extrovert brain, like it's shut off. What would I want to know the answer to? I mean, the easy thing is what's the meaning of life, but that's dumb. Um, I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's a terrible way to end it. Like,
That's okay.
I don't know. I don't know what I want to know.
Maybe your question could be, what should your question be?
That's right. That's what I want to know the answer to is like, what would my question be? What am I? I'm trying to think of like, what like confuses me the most, or what causes me like the most. Um, and maybe this. Here we go. I want to know why we as people care so deeply about what other people think of us.
Mm, that's a good question.
I
It's
don't
a
know if
very
that's a
good
good answer. I
question.
don't know if that's a good question or not. Like, because it just kills people, right? It's like in a number of different ways, it just destroys. Like people just care so deeply, and prevents them from actually living their full life, their full potential, because they're so worried about what other people think. So I don't know. I don't know why that fear drives us.
Mhm. It's a good question though. It's definitely better than what should your question be. So I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate you taking the time to be on this podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything that you got right now.
Oh man, game on. All right. So my book, Keep Chopping Wood. You can just go to keepchoppingwood.com. To kind of the backstory for the bulk discount, you can just get it on Amazon. Just search Keep Chopping Wood. You can find me on every social media platform at Kevin Deshazo, and my website is deshazo.me.
Awesome. I want to thank you once again for taking the time to be in this podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you listen the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a favor. Go and pick up a copy of Keep Chopping Wood. Go and follow Kevin on social media. I'll make sure everything is linked in the show notes down below. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. You can also visit my brand new website, jacobkelly.ca. And if you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram and at My Social Life Podcast, or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.